Listen to the Vibes.
Welcome to another episode of Listen to the Vibes. And I'm very excited today because I have Mr. Kevin Godley here with me. He was with 10cc and Godley and Cream.
It's funny you're mentioning the name of the band, because if I remember things correctly, in your neck of the woods when we were touring back in the day, they didn't know what 10cc was, so they used to call us the Tennessee Boys. We left in '76, I think, and they both Eric and Graham carried on quite successfully for a while. But in fact, the Things We Do for Love, I think, was one of the reasons we left the band, because we didn't like it particularly. It's interesting. We were an interesting bunch of guys because we were unique in that we could all play, we could all sing, and we could all produce. So, but we all had very different taste buds, and it was that combination, that clash sometimes, that was the chemistry that made the band whatever you might describe it as, and that we were very difficult to pin down. I think, in terms of, you wouldn't describe us as playing this kind of music or the other kind of music. We spread ourselves quite across all the different genres before the word genre was popular, because we didn't see why we shouldn't, really. We weren't a blues band, we weren't a pop band, we weren't a jazz band, we weren't anything specific. The only thing that we didn't do particularly well, we didn't have a visual identity, which I think hampered our success to a degree. I started looking into to advance my own musical skills. I'm a drummer, so I don't really play an instrument as such. But I'd like to be able to record more stuff at home than I do. So I've been looking into all the different pieces of software that are available. And it's kind of irritating that all the sounds that you can buy seem to be very consciously slotted into particular genres. You know, there is a group of hip hop sounds, there is a group of blues sounds, there is a group of jazz sounds, there's a group of grime sounds, and there's a group of EDM sounds, you know, and it's like they all seem to be targeted towards very specific marketplaces, as opposed to allowing a musician to explore and expand what sound can do and take it outside any of these boxes. That's probably not a very popular thing to say, but it just seems to be that everything is a lot more refined into commercial areas these days than it used to be. It's like everybody almost knows too much, in a sense. We need to be exploring a bit more than we do.
When it comes to things like the software they have nowadays, do you think that takes away from real creativity? Because, I mean, to me, it's almost as if it's not being utilized, I think, the way it should be. If people are just relying too much on that and not really on their own creativity.
It's possible, and it's almost because it can be too easy. It's almost not fair to compare it to previous generations' work, because the situation, everybody's musical situation was different in every generation, and used whatever tools were to hand. But I know what you mean. It's so easy to pick up a keyboard full of different samples, and one can find a vocal sound that you like and create something, I don't know, that was very similar to the track that we did called I'm Not in Love, just by playing it. And you have all that sound immediately to hand. But then again, there was something magical about having to find a way to create something that existed in your head and make it real without having these tools to play with. I think it can in fact make you lazy, or it can in fact, if you're very talented and you have something to say musically, help speed things up for you. It depends on how you like to work. I like to work in a way that doesn't tell me everything. I don't like to know what I'm going to come up with at the end of the recording process, or indeed the writing process. I like to be surprised. And if I know what's at my fingertips all the way through, it's not particularly satisfying. The exploratory journey isn't as inventive as it could be. I like to screw things up. So if I'm given a particular sound, I will probably mess around with the knobs and sliders to make it sound like something else, purely because that's in my DNA. The other thing that's disappeared, or to a degree, is when records were made, I don't know, let's say 20 years ago, maybe, and further back, they were all made in studios, in professional recording studios. And the kind of music that came out of Detroit would be different to the kind of music that came out of Texas and the kind of music that came out of London. Partially because of where the material was written and recorded. It reflected something of the place itself that seems to be disappearing to a degree. There is no sense of Motown records sounded like Motown records, and that was, because of the room, the equipment, the players. It's interesting. The solo record I recently put out, where I had people send me instrumental tracks, a lot of which were amazing. I couldn't help but notice a lot of the drum sounds that they were using were the same, because most of them were samples, and a lot of the string sounds were the same because they were samples. And it didn't stop them being creative with it, but it made everything sound a little generic sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Which was a shame.
It really is. I mean, any Joe Blow can just about sit in their living room or their bedroom and make an album. They don't go out to these studios and have great producers help them to develop a sound. Everybody just kind of sounds the same.
It's become a lonely occupation, making music. It's something that you do at home over a laptop.
Exactly.
And craft the music into being. And it's funny, again, just going back to the software that's available, usually there is some video on YouTube to instruct you how the software works, so, which I watch. And, the notion of sitting there carving up a tempo on drums and moving the snare drum beat ever so slightly to the right and a kick drum ever so slightly to the left, it's fine, but drums sounded like that anyway. It's why do I have to? Well, obviously it's for convenience.
Right.
Not everybody has the space to record a drum kit, so it makes sense in terms of the accessibility of sound. But you're quite right, that the whole thing about a bunch of guys sitting around playing is kind of rare from what I can see. We live in the age of robots, so I was lucky enough to spend most of my life doing things that I regard as play. I mean, music isn't work. I mean, maybe that's why it's called that. Maybe that's why you play music. You don't work music, you play music. And if you find things you like to do for a living, you'll never work a day in your life. I've been lucky that way, I guess. And back in the day when I was young, being in a band or playing a musical instrument was, I suppose, the same as skateboarding and playing video games now. It was just of its time. It's what everybody I knew, all my contemporaries wanted to do. So we did. Somehow we found a way to actually get to that place. God knows how. I have no idea how we managed to do it or why we were so intent on doing it. But we lost a few people along the way, but we kind of got there in the end, yeah.
What do you like to do outside of music?
I make little films, music videos. I've been doing that for a long, long time. You must know that.
Oh, yeah.
Because of the Cry video. Been doing that for a long time. Recently, I've been doing a lot of writing. I've written a couple of screenplays that I would like to direct. I'm also about to join a video games company as a sort of music stroke conceptual consultant. I'm very interested in virtual reality and augmented reality and all these new technologies that are coming along. I've been asked to come up with screen content for a couple of musical projects, one being an opera. So I am seriously busy. It's very strange. I've never been busier. And for that, I can't help but thank technology. Because without all this new technology, so many of the things that I am now able to do, I wouldn't have been able to do before this device that we're currently using. Mm-hmm. Although it's been boring to a degree over the last year because I've not been able to speak to somebody who exists beyond the waistline. It's become ubiquitous. It's absolutely necessary, and it does help. So my sort of what I do is always driven by an idea. If I have a clear idea of what I want to do to get from A to Z, even though I'm not 100% sure of all the details, at least I have all the tools to be able to do it now at my fingertips, which is great. Which is great for me. Another thing that has disappeared, and I'm still unsure why that has to be. Everything now, particularly in video editing, is all about number crunching. It's all about being able to tap in codes into the computer and things will happen on the screen. Back then, in order to achieve those effects of going from one face to another, like so, or like so, or like so, they were all done with little paddles on a console, and you could physically make it happen, watch it happen, physically. That's all gone. So your physical contact with the material is gradually evaporating, which is slightly annoying because you want to see it, you want to be part of making this happen. You know, you want to be able to press buttons and something will happen. And it comes home to me every time I switch on the television. It's like, okay, it looks great, and this particular monitor has been designed to give me the perfect picture, but I can't change it. I can't remove any color. I can't desaturate the color and make it black and white. I can't make it look like shit if I want to make it look like shit. That's gone. You're given things and they are perfect according to the manufacturer. So the experience of doing things, particularly again, video editing, takes 3 days to do as opposed to 1 day to do. And that's because nonlinear editing, digital editing, is such that you don't have to make a decision. You can try everything. You can put a shot here, you can extend that shot, you can slow that shot down, you can turn it to black and white, you can do everything that you can think of up here. So you do. And it takes about 3 days. Whereas back in the day, we used to do it in 12 hours because we couldn't do that. We had to make decisions using this and using that.
Mhm.
That process has radically been changed, and I kind of miss that discipline. So you're not using your brain as much as you used to. You're not thinking through problems. You're just trying stuff until it works, and that is addictive.
Oh, yeah.
Costs money, takes time. What is good about it is that I've learned to physically edit myself. I've started working on Adobe Premiere, and I never dared go near a keyboard to do my own editing before. But now that it is available, I've dared to jump in, and I've done a few things myself and quite enjoyed it. So it's both sides of the coin.
Who were your influences?
People like Art Blakey. I was listening to jazz when I first started playing the drums, more jazz than anything else. That gradually became Motown, I would imagine, the simplicity of Motown. And I'm beginning to understand that the playing in the pocket was, as they call it, was more important than showing off, doing drum solos and showing off your chops around the drum set, keeping the beat and keeping the groove.
Oh, yeah.
But Keith Moon, crazy style of playing, but a hero.
Oh,
He
yeah.
attacked the drums, they attacked him back. So, that was great. That was a great team. The drums and Keith, Ginger Baker. There are many, many, many drummers that I probably assimilated into my DNA because I'm not a great drummer. I play, but I keep it simple, really.
How many different bands have you worked with, and what has made you decide which direction that the video should go in?
Oh, I have no idea how many, 100 maybe, artists, maybe more. And certain people a few times. When we started making videos, there was no such thing as a video industry, so nobody really knew what they were doing. So they would come to people like myself, and when I was working with Lord Cream as a team, they would come to us, and all they would say was, "We like what you just did for so-and-so, will you make a film for us? We have this much money. And if we like the track, we go and make a film." But there was very little, and in some cases, no marketing department to deal with, nobody who really could step in and say, well, that's really not the kind of thing we need for this band, because nobody knew what they needed for any band, or in fact what the purpose of making a video was. That was how it was for a good few years. So we were given a chunk of money and availability of the artist, and off we went and made whatever film we thought would work. And those were the days when the lunatics were running the asylum. We were two of the lunatics, and well, it's true. It was only when MTV started to mature into something and become a global entity that everybody began to realize the commercial potential of a video. Initially, videos were made, or music films were made, because an artist wasn't available to appear on a particular live TV show. So they went ahead and made a little film to show instead. At least that's how it was in the UK. But once the music video came into being, it was a whole different world. And again, still the Lunatics ran the asylum for a good few years. But gradually the labels began to understand how videos worked, and they began to formulate their own opinions about how this kind of video would work for this kind of artist. And then everything very gradually, creatively began to go downhill. That took a long time. But that happens a lot. Once the suits get a hold of it, things change. But we had a great time. We had a great time. I think it worked because we didn't know what we were doing, really. From the very beginning, the very first video that we ever made, we didn't really know what we were doing. We were just applying something that we learned at art college, where we spent many years prior to being in a band, that in order to get the best out of yourself creatively, go one step further into the beyond, where you don't know what you're doing, and see what else you can discover apart from what you know you can do. And we applied that to making videos. We instinctively felt that making a film for a piece of music shouldn't simply be a story and a boring narrative that is showing and telling what the song is about, because that's boring. And those kind of videos still are boring to me. So we were always looking for ways to use our brains and the available technology to create something different. And I think we kind of helped mold the notion of what a music video could be. And it was the first time in our creative lives that we were in at the beginning of something. When we started making music professionally, we were tagging on the end of the 60s, So there was a tradition there. There was a way of doing things there. We kind of joined that. We took it away from that bit, but there was no provenance. There was nothing to build music video on. So everybody involved back then was making it up as they went along, us as well. But I'm kind of proud of what we did and what I did, because we helped push it in a more interesting direction. It was like playing an instrument. We'd go in the edits. We used to love the edit process. We'd kind of go into a studio or a location, shoot what we knew we had to shoot, and we kind of planned it, but never meticulously. We always planned it in a way that left room to play. And when we got into the edit suite, we treated it like we did music. We left room for us to mess around and even go into the room behind where all the screens are and use screwdrivers to tamper with the various bits of machinery that were there to make sure everything was perfect. We go in and fuck it up, and people would be horrified. It's the mistakes. Sometimes that extra bit of sauce in there that you don't know exists until it does, that's kind of what makes everything work. In fact, the technique we used to do Cry that you mentioned earlier, we were just messing around, and we suddenly remembered that there's this thing called a wipe that people use to do terrible captions and titles. And so we tried using that instead of just cutting or dissolving between faces, and whoa, that's rather good. What happens if you do this? If you soften it, or if you do it this way? It was all really trial and error. And in some cases more error than trial. And we burnt out many video editors doing that.
Hey, but sweet
we
accidents.
made a difference.
Yeah, exactly. Sweet accidents, man.
Yeah, that's all it was really about. A lot of great stuff came out of accidents.
Have you created that video that you'd consider your masterpiece? Or are you still working towards that?
I wouldn't call it a video. I did a project back in 1990 that I consider to be one of my proudest moments. It was called One World, One Voice. And it came about because on BBC Two in the UK, they were running, I think it was a two-week slot where they were playing a number of different documentaries and programs about climate change and the environment and so on and so forth. And they wanted to come up with some kind of musical finale for the two-week slot. And they were originally thinking of mounting a concert, not a Live Aid. Mm-hmm. And they invited me to come in and see if I could come up with an idea for doing that. And I thought that was a terrible idea, doing a Live Aid concert. There's no way you're going to top Live Aid in a million years, so don't even go there. Mm. And my idea was to reverse the process. Instead of flying all the musicians in and having them perform 2 or 3 songs, it was to start a piece of music in a particular place, film it being started, record it being started, and take that information around the world and have other people add to it. And it was such a bizarre notion back then, and I didn't think anyone would go for it, but they did. I had to present the idea to a bunch of broadcasters, and they said, yeah, let's do that instead. So I then had to figure out a way to actually do it. But that's exactly what we did. We had probably about 250 musicians in all, a lot of well-known people and a lot of people you'd never heard of, all playing at what I would probably term as the first real genuine piece of world music, all on film, all on tape, masterfully assembled by audio producer Rupert Hine, who's since sadly passed on. But you should look it up on YouTube if you're not familiar with it. But there was some extraordinary. If you imagine the Gypsy Kings playing with Nusrat Ali Khan from India, if you can imagine a symphony orchestra in Russia playing with the Kodo drummers, if you can imagine that kind of thing all the way through and it working, then, sorry, it's Nusrat Ali Fateh Khan is the full name, if I remember correctly. So, it was an extraordinary experience for me. To meet a lot of my musical heroes for the first time. I got to meet Lou Reed, I got to work with Laurie Anderson, I just some Wayne Shorter, Little Steven, some amazing people. But they were all driven by this notion of contributing music to a single piece of music that was that displayed a kind of togetherness, and the only kind of togetherness that music can deliver, and the making of music that can deliver. So, sorry, I'm being a bit long-winded about it, but that is the thing that I'm most proud of. But it's the thing that I'm most proud of, and there's not many effects in it, there's not many gimmicks in it, there's not any really, devastating pieces of technology used to get it. We travel around the world with a video camera, a 16mm camera, a few bits and pieces of other stuff, probably arcane recording equipment, and we managed to get this done somehow. And that's what I'm most proud of. There are particular high points in video, like Rocket for Herbie Hancock, Two Tribes, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Every Breath You Take for the Police, When We Was Fab for George Harrison. I could go on. But in terms of the spirit of a project and doing something because, not just as a commercial venture, but doing something that felt significant, at least it did to me at the time, that I hold that particular project very dearly. Mm. So it's out there on YouTube. It should be should be being released hopefully this year on DVD as well. Because most of the stuff that I do has a strong element of performance. It's the performance.
Mm-hmm.
All the other stuff, how you present that is a frame. Really, you really want the viewer to experience the piece of music in its best light, and that's all you're really doing. You're trying to frame it. You don't want everyone to just think of the frame you made for it. Although sometimes, Cry is a good example. That is a performance video, but people do remember it because it has a very specific look to it that seemed to strike a note at the time. And you can't actually think of that song without that particular set of visuals. But it doesn't always work that way. And there has to be something. The whole point about making a music video for me is to make that piece of music stand out in its true light, in an appropriate way for the song. And that can involve many things or very little. It just may be a little tweak of something that's slightly different, as you quite rightly say. It's not just a matter of throwing everything at the screen.
You got to work on a video for the Beatles anthology album, didn't you?
I did, Real Love. That was an honor. I'd done something for Paul. I did a couple of things for Paul prior to that. I did a video for him called Come On People. And I did a 3-screen pre-show for him for his 1993 tour of America. It was played on stage before he came on stage. And I've known him for a long time. We met back in 10cc days. So that was astonishing, but to be asked to do something for the Beatles was it was an honor. It really, I'll tell you an amusing story about that. When everything was shot and came to the editorial process, the actual track that we were given to cut to was a poor mix. John's original vocal was down in the mix because they were probably concerned, quite rightly, that it didn't get in the wrong hands and people start bootlegging it before it was actually released. So I think it was a deliberate thing to give us not a great mix to work to. Now I respond to sound when I'm working with an edit. I respond to sound. I couldn't hear the words. I couldn't grasp the vocal. So for my own workaround, I went into a local sound studio and added iSound song over the top so I could kind of hear it better. So when I was working, I could, I knew what the song was, what it's supposed to sound like. And somehow, at some point after the whole thing was finished, that version got out there. So somewhere still on the internet is John, Paul, George, Ringo and Kevin, which is kind of embarrassing in a way, but there is a version with me singing the song out there, wow, which makes me cringe when I think of it. But
you have a wonderful voice, man.
Well, thank you. But it doesn't belong there, that's for sure.
What can we expect out of you here in the near future, other than your video projects?
I have no idea. And that's how I like it.
I agree.
Like I said, I have a number of projects, a number of irons in the fire. I wrote a script about Orson Welles, which I would like to make, which is set on the last night of his life and has him looking back at his first early triumph in Dublin when he was 16 years old in 1931. I'd like to make that film. There's another film I'd like to make, but my interests go across the board. I've got a number of art projects, fine art projects, that I would like to do, but I like to keep things elastic. I've been relatively lucky during my creative life that opportunities have arisen that I wasn't expecting, that I've somehow managed to grasp and turn into something productive. So that seems to be continuing. So I'm sort of relying on that to a degree, looking for the right opportunities to continue doing good art. I mean, if I have a motto, that is it, just make good art. That's it.
I want to thank Mr. Godley for joining us today. It was such a pleasure having you on. Is there any websites or anything that you'd like to mention that people can go to for your music or your videos?
Well, I'm on YouTube. You can visit me on YouTube, on Instagram, on Twitter. My website is kevin-godley.com. And that's about it.
Well,
I'd ask you to come over to my place, but I'm not going to.
that's a little bit of a ways
That's
for me,
it,
I believe.
really. I'm in. Yeah, exactly. I'm in all the usual places. The only thing I'm not on is Facebook. And I recently started listening. I haven't joined any conversations yet. I've been listening to this new thing called Clubhouse. It's a bunch of people having conversations, live conversations. Essentially, and you can kind of drop into the conversation and join in the conversation, which can be interesting or utter garbage, depending on your opinion. But it's just a new thing, relatively new thing that people seem to be doing. Yeah, so I'm visible, not hugely visible out there, but I am visible if people are interested in seeing what I'm up to.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Big fan, and this meant a lot to me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I've been blinking away here. I seem to be spending so much time in front of the screen. It's not doing my eyes any good.
Oh,
it really is. On Zoom calls, for day after day on Zoom calls and looking at information and working on the screen. But thank you. I enjoyed it, actually. It was an intelligent conversation, but very good. I enjoyed it and enjoyed talking to you.
Well, I want to thank you. Thank everyone who's joined us, and we will catch you on the next one.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Listen to the Vibes. You can catch us on Buzzsprout or wherever you listen to your favourite podcasts, and on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook at The Vibes Broadcast Network